Hello and welcome to another episode of the Gritty Hour. I'm here with a special guest, Steve Shaiken, the author of Queensborough Rock. Welcome to the Gritty Hour, Steve.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And since it's music-related book, which we'll get into in a second, I have my trusty cohort, George Bauer, joining us from Las Vegas. How you doing, George? Okay. And Steve, you're down in Florida, right?
That's right, Tampa, Florida. The
Yeah,
more
so
the merrier, George.
we got the whole country triangled in now. So tell us a little bit about the book, Steve. How did you get into it? What made you want to write it?
Well, it's based loosely on an actual experience I had when, as a young man, probably about 21, 22, I started to manage a musician. And we actually, made a tape. We didn't do it with, pawning and, with, I was a cab driver, so I had some money. But we booked him into coffee shops and little nightclubs and shipped around a demo tape and actually got several auditions in, some of the large, companies. And that whole opening scene where he goes in and plays the tape for that, ridiculous idiot is actually based on a real experience. And that's, and then I went to creative writing school and decided I should write about this and started it in 1973, wrote what was probably about 35 typewritten pages after, several revisions, because that's how we did it in pre-computer days. You wrote it by hand and then you typed it, and it was a nightmare. And then I went off to law school and forgot about it. And I'd say about 2.5, 3 years ago, I finally got around to opening up the boxes I'd packed away when I moved from California to Tampa a few years before that. And lo and behold, I found a suitcase which had all these manuscripts I'd written in creative writing school and after. And here was this. And I looked at it and I said, wow, like this is actually a story I really want to tell. Of course, it'll be enhanced and exaggerated, but it will be a story I want to tell.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. Is this your first book, Steve?
No, I have done a 4-book series, like what I call exotic noir thrillers, that are based, again, loosely on the 3.5 years that my wife and I lived in Bangkok, Thailand.
Oh.
And the protagonist in that story happens to be like a criminal defense lawyer from San Francisco. So I, wonder where I got that idea from. That's where I practiced for about 30 plus years.
Nice.
And but that was it. I wouldn't say it's autobiographical. To some extent it is, but it's historical fiction. The other one is just pure fiction.
Yeah.
In this book, I did have to get certain things straight. People like you guys would know if I had him listening to a song that wasn't released till 6 months later, or if I put the Electric Circus on the wrong street. Someone would catch me.
Take you to task on it, yeah.
Yeah. That's right.
So just give us the essence of the book. The book is about a guy, Jack Bernstein, right?
Right, and he's a young graduate of Queens College, as I was, and he wants to be a rock and roll manager, as I did. And unfortunately, he's stuck out in Queens, living in a basement apartment, driving a beat-up old Volvo, and trolling, like basically the places that the big sharks in Manhattan don't want to troll. And on those rare occasions when he does find anything good, the sharks, from Manhattan with the nice suits and the connections and the people that get backstage passes, they steal him away. And this happens to him twice. And it really hurts him when it happens to the guy he made the tape for and went into debt and probably might have been able to get something for him. And so to pick himself off the floor, he decides to do something he wouldn't normally think of. He goes out to a gay nightclub because he figures there's probably a lot of really good musicians playing there because they pay good money. And none of the, this is back in the late 60s, early 70s. There would be a stigma in going to this place, but he figures I got no shame if I can find a good band. And when he's there, he sees a very famous promoter. And remember, this is it. He himself, he's not necessarily prejudiced, but he's a shark in his own way. And so he essentially blackmails this guy by essentially implying, if you don't help me out, give me some, good venues, places I can put my bands, I'm going to out you. And so the guy says, sure, I will do it, but I'm only going to give you 2 venues. The third one that you want, you got to go to my friend. He's a mobster, but he has a lot of nightclubs. And that's how he meets this guy, Vinny, who sort of becomes, in a certain way, his savior. He says to him, if you will just help my idiot nephew that I hate, but I love my sister, and he wants to be a rock star. If you just do everything you can for him, like, I'll open doors for you, I'll solve a lot of your problems. And he does it, but they all get into working together. Max is a little racist idiot, and Jack hooks him up with an African-American band in South Jamaica. And despite all the apparent tensions, they manage to become a cohesive band. And it's about, what happens to him after that.
Yeah. Well, your writing style is, I don't know if you ever seen the movie, what was that Spike Lee movie, George?
Do the Right Thing?
No, Summer of Sam.
Summer of Sam.
Oh, yeah. I
don't know if you ever saw that, but
of course it took place in the Bronx, right? So
well, some of it did actually, City Island, yeah. But no, what I wanted to say was Spike Lee captured the essence of that era very well in the movie. And I think your book captures the essence of that era very well. New York City in the early 70s predominantly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that, because the next project I've been thinking about would actually do something I haven't done much of, drawing my experience as a young criminal lawyer in Brooklyn, and it would be set roughly in that same era. So I'm off to a good start if I can.
Well, George, just full disclosure, is a retired NYPD cop, so maybe you could use him as a character.
Well, then he probably loves all those defense lawyers, because making them come to preliminary hearings, and getting double time or time and a half,
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a benefit to getting those court appearances, and it's really not a lot of work. You sit around most of the time.
Now, we used to say, and no one gets shot in the courthouse, but that may not be true now that we're gone.
Yeah, it's certainly true. I mean, well, there's all sorts of craziness going on.
Of course. Well, I salute your service.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So George and I are both into that era of music, so this touches close to home for us too. So
that's the market. That's my audience.
Yeah, I have to wonder when this becomes a movie, what the soundtrack's going to sound like.
Well, it's sort of suggested. I mean, everybody listened to the Beatles. I didn't mention the Rolling Stones, but everybody listens to them. I was at the time, especially if you're thinking about the 60s, you're going to lean more towards what might be called psychedelic music, although it's, not clear what is psychedelic. So, we mention a lot of, I got the Electric Prune in there, and but everybody else too,
Yeah. What would those be the bands that would, like the Electric Prune, would they be making the rounds late 60s, early 70s in those clubs?
Well, there was a brief, as I say, this was during the psychedelic era, and they're commenting how it's coming to an end, and they, and you have to be able to shift. But there was a period with Jimi Hendrix and the early Jefferson Airplane, and then of course the Beatles, and then when the Beatles put out Sgt. Pepper, which had a lot of psychedelic aspects to it, the Stones came out with Satanic Majesty's Request. So I mean, yeah, that was big. It wasn't the only music at all, not at all.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we do have him listening to Joni Mitchell, and certainly a lot of soul music, which he seems to like very much. Him and his girlfriend argue about which blues is better, British or American. So yeah. I mean, Jack's got eclectic taste. He's in the business,
Yeah. Well, you did develop the characters very well. It does read like a screenplay, and you can envision it being a movie.
Well, if you know anyone who wants to turn it into a script in a movie, they know how to find me.
Well, George will do it for you.
I don't know
before we even get further into that book, I use it as a background, the cover of your book, which my large head is blocking. But who did that cover? It's very well done.
Yes, I've been using on most of the on most of the suspense books. I've been using a woman named Suzette Vaughn, who is actually taken a slight break from, she was so successful and in such demand, she took a break. I guess she couldn't take on any new work and wanted to finish up the commitments and take some time off. She'll be back though. I mean, she's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a really nice cover. I enjoyed it. George, you have any questions for Steve?
Well, one of the things that I noticed, I was able to get through the first 4 chapters, and I'll continue with it. It was very, very detailed, I found, in particular with the description of the vehicles and sometimes the clothing. It was very well done. I'm looking forward to getting through the rest of it. I unfortunately couldn't get any further with some other commitments that I had. But how long have you been writing? You said you began, I believe, before we went on the air, you went to school for creative writing,
Right?
and how did that connect with the music aspect? I mean, are you a musician? I see some guitars in the background.
Back in the day, back in the late 60s or so, I did get a guitar, but I was so ignorant. I got a nylon string classical guitar. I mean, that's how ignorant I was. I did learn a few chords. When I retired from practicing law in 2015, and went over to live in Thailand for a few years, I did get a real acoustic guitar and dug out my daughter's made in Mexico Stratocaster and started, got an amplifier. So I've been playing it ever since, but it'd be really a stretch to call me a musician. I've always wanted to write. I took creative writing in college, and I, actually had a couple of short stories and poems published on magazines that disappeared immediately back in the late 60s. And then I went to creative writing school, but for some reason, I decided that it was, probably a better career move to go to law school.
Mhm.
And I did that. And, I tried, but, it's just like when you have a family and you have kids and you have a very intense job, you're doing plenty of reading and writing anyways. Many
Yep.
judges might say I was actually continuing creative writing. And then when I went to Bangkok, there's a lot of writers, a lot of writers live in Asia because it's cheap and you can support yourself without, being Stephen King or, Rowling or anybody like that. And there was some fine writing groups. I was in one of them called Key Bangers Bangkok. And just being in a group where 2 or 3 times a month you go to critique each other's work, and then you become friends with other writers and you start meeting up in coffee shops and, each other's houses and working, looking at your stuff and helping each other out. And that really got me into it. So I wrote a collection of character sketches of interesting people I'd met in Bangkok. And with the encouragement of these folks, I put it together into a novel called Bangkok Shadows that still sells like 1 or 2 books almost every day.
Wow.
So I put it out in 2018. I mean, that's now, no one's retiring, I mean, certainly you wouldn't want to trade an NYPD pension for, Bangkok Shadows royalties, but not everybody has, I mean, the idea is people are reading it. And
Right.
About Kindle Unlimited, KU, I get a lot of people read. I put my books on KU because I want people to read them. And also, as a good businessman, I realize you're not losing, if you're not losing sales, people who have KU are only going to read books that are on KU. Like someone who subscribes to Netflix isn't going to go and pay to watch a movie from some other service. So I get people to read it, and that's really what it's all about, honestly. That's really what it is.
It turns out my head was too big for the background, so I put this page up. Is Crosswinds Press your publisher?
Crosswinds Press is me. I mean,
okay.
I to be honest with you, I found that it's much better not to have your own personal name as the publisher, not just for ego reasons, but just, it just seems better. Secondly, it actually does seem more impressive. I mean, maybe the fact that somebody went to the trouble of registering, a publishing company and had the brains to put all their books together under one imprinter, maybe you deserve a little bit of credit in this self-publishing world. But I don't want to delude people. I am not a traditionally published author, and I actually have no desire to be one. At my age, I'm not going to start shopping around manuscripts to agents and hope maybe they answer me, and if they do, it'll be a year of rewrites, and then maybe they'll sell it to a publisher, and maybe it'll like be successful, and maybe it'll wind up on the remainder table. So I decided to bypass all that and just do it myself. It's a learning process, but it's not that hard.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, the Mafia the Mafia guy's nephew is in a band called New Plateaus, right?
Right.
Now, is that band based on any other kind of band from the era?
Well, I guess you could say in a certain sense, there were interracial bands like the Chambers Brothers and the Allman Brothers. So I guess maybe that was in the back of my mind, and there was also, but it wasn't based on a specific band, although the individual musicians were based on composites of musicians that I met. I mean,
Yeah.
I consulted with, I think I mentioned, I consulted with a guy who was a professional drummer who opened up for the Rascals to inquire to make sure I had drummers right. And the lead guitarist I knew very well. He was the lead guitarist on both the lead guitarist, both the fellow Ed Stern, the studio musician, and the African-American guy Clayton, who's the lead guitarist in the band. I had worked with lead guitarists on the tape and many other, when you need to bring one in to complement your, solo artist. And I had a pretty good idea how to represent them. And everybody do whatever you want about bass players, because nobody really knows what they're like anyways, except for Lemmy Kilmister, and I'm not using him.
You kind of
quiet and reserved.
Yeah.
Huh?
Quiet and reserved.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
players.
generally it. Yeah.
You kind of leave the what it might sound like to the reader. I guess the reader interjects its own sound into these characters. What do you think the band sounds like?
I envision them as sounding somewhat like one of the really popular Motown men's groups, particularly one where they had like a voice that could reach a falsetto, because that's what Max does sometimes, and that's why we emphasize that he does like My Girl, and then they do other art. That that's sort of how I envision them. That, remember, he's a singer, but he sort of becomes like into the whole soul music and R&B scene,
Right?
and that's pretty much where the band drifts. And really, that's their sound. I mean, that really is their sound. I mean, he discovers that he can sing that stuff. So in my mind, now to somebody else, they could say, "Oh no, I envision Simon and Garfunkel or Iron Butterfly," but that's how I would see it. Sort of like, a Motown group with a white guy up front. That's all.
Yeah, you do leave it open for interpretation to the reader, which is good.
Yeah.
Now, why do you have Paul McCartney on your site?
I don't think that I had any choice in that. I think that's probably the price you have to pay to put this up on. Is this on my website, or
this is dmme.net? So that's them.
Okay. dmme.net was a guy, was another, not a podcast, but a reviewer, a blog who reviews books, and he put this up. He basically wrote about it. I have no control over what else he puts up on his site. I wouldn't mind on my own blog. I wouldn't mind people advertise. Paul McCartney wants to advertise on my blog. I'll give him a great rate.
So who do you think is going to play the nephew, when the movie comes out?
I think, he might be a little too old, but they have a way they can make people look young. I think that I was thinking Jesse Eisenberg, because he played such a great jerk in The Social Game when he played Mark Zuckerberg.
Oh, okay. All right.
Somebody he might be good at that.
No, that color's in my imagery of the band. Yeah. So do you see any kind of series out of this project?
It's possible, because I've decided, in fact, I just got back from visiting a friend of mine who was a legal aid criminal defense lawyer with me back in the late 70s up to about 80, 81. He then became the county counsel of Gunnison County, Colorado, population 12,000. Imagine that, officer, going from the criminal court system in Brooklyn to the cows of Gunnison County. But anyways, and we talked about that era, and I mentioned I was thinking about writing, a legal story about it. And if I were to put it if I were to have a sequel, I'd probably put it in that same Son of Sam era, because when I was working at Legal Aid, we had to work night court. Remember that, George? At night court.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when it ended 12, 1 o'clock, at least in Brooklyn. Where did you work? Manhattan or Brooklyn or Queens?
I was in the Bronx.
Okay, Bronx.
And Manhattan. When I worked the streets, I was in Manhattan.
Okay, I worked one summer as an intern in the Bronx. Burton Roberts. I'll never forget that. But after work would be over at like 12 o'clock or so. Everybody, I mean, the court, everyone who was young, the DA, the defense lawyers, we'd all hop in cabs and go up to CBGB's and listen to incredible music, basically for the price of a lousy beer. So, right. I mean, that era really, there was a lot easier. They didn't have $400 concert tickets yet. It was, right. You could see a lot more.
Back then, from the law enforcement perspective, we wanted to get the arrestee, into court before midnight, because if you were able to do that, then you had to stay at court all night. But if you missed the closing of court, then you'd have to come back the next day at 9 a.m. and show up, and you wouldn't be continually on the clock making the overtime.
Right.
So I don't know if that's a little bit of the incentive from the police perspective, but I remember in Manhattan, in the Tombs and stuff in Lower Manhattan, it was just very, very, very strange, a very, very busy place. I'm sure Brooklyn was also.
Well, you got to make sure.
Brooklyn was too, but in its own way, Brooklyn was very congenial, actually. It sort of was a community. I mean, like basically the lawyers and the people in the court were a world of their own. Although, it wasn't really it wasn't in a horrible place. I mean, if actually the courts was within walking distance of Brooklyn Heights, it was actually in a nice area. But those days are over now. I don't think, that's a different world now.
Well, George, did the criminals have the courtesy to commit the crime around 10, 11 o'clock, or usually?
Yeah, well, we would. We also had guys that liked to make, that really were very active at making arrests. So once they got back from their lunch hour, they were out hunting, because they know if they could get something into the precinct at a reasonable time, they get the paperwork done, which usually took a couple of hours. It used to take 2 to 3 hours. Now that they've streamlined a lot of that. Yeah, I mean, it was just great stuff. I mean, we just it was an enjoyable time. I mean, even the ADAs I worked with on a couple of cases were terrific, and I'm very, happy with that.
It was a great time. As we used to say at Legal Aid, that business is booming and we got a monopoly. Because as you know, how many people actually hired their own lawyer? 1 in 20, maybe, right?
Yeah. It was crazy. I mean, typically you're getting a young minority that's getting arrested. Those are the people out on the streets. I mean, not that there were arrests from all races, but it seemed like if you would look at the majority, it was young black kids hanging out and causing problems, either mischief or, God forbid, a robbery or something like that. So, you take them for robbery. Now you're going to court that night because of the seriousness of the crime, what you're charging them with.
But,
Stephen,
there was no shortage of business.
You had mentioned a possibility of a sequel or maybe a series. So a sequel, if it was a one-off sequel, would it be in the latter part of the 70s it would take place?
Yeah. I'd want to have it so the music is, has totally changed, and now he's got to deal with if he's in the music business, disco came along, and and then after disco came, the new, like what we were talking about, so you might call it new wave or alternate rock, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, when you mentioned
really
CBGBs.
Yeah, I mean, it was more than just punk. I mean, it was,
No, but then you had the Ramones and Blondie and Talking Heads.
New York Dolls.
Other New York Dolls.
Television. Yeah. I mean, they couldn't all be pigeonholed. That's what made them interesting.
And after that,
deal with them.
At that point, then you have the English invasion, the new wave invasion from people like The Cure and
Clash,
all that. I mean,
Sex Pistols.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, there's been movies made about about Sid Vicious. There was one movie, Sid
Yeah,
and Nancy.
Sid and
That was a
Nancy.
movie. I saw it. It was very depressing.
Yeah.
That wasn't really I do respect the Clash. I mean, they had some good stuff. Sex Pistols, I was never really enthusiastic about them, to put it
Yeah.
mildly.
Well, that's when they were all those guys were doing their stint in CBGBs and those kind of clubs.
Well,
Back
yeah,
yeah,
at least the American groups were, but they were good. I like them.
yeah. Well, I really do hope somebody turns this into a movie because I want to see it after having read it.
Well, if anyone's listening, like I say, I'm always ready. I imagine, it'd have to be somebody would have to read the book and say, I can turn this into a script.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I'm always open to that, but it's not doesn't necessarily happen in the world of, independent self-publishing, but it
Yeah. So
has happened.
this came out last year. This book.
This book came out around November.
Oh, November. Okay. And how's it selling? Still doing pretty good?
It's surprisingly, it had it at first. It was a big spurt. It got a lot of really nice reviews, and because it's not part of a series, it doesn't automatically sell itself. Here's something that I think almost everyone in self-publishing knows: if you have a series, you can give away the first book for free, and if people like it, they will then buy all the other ones. And I do that because the world is full of people who never heard of me. So every time I give it away for free, there's millions more people who could take it, and depending on how vigorously you do it, hundreds or even 1,000 people could take it. Now with a freestanding book, that's not going to work. You give the book away for free. I got the book. I mean, sometimes you might want to do it just to get it out there, but it's more of a slow, steady slog. And I'm reaching the point now that it's regularly selling. In other words, it doesn't go like a week without selling a few, and people read it on Kindle Unlimited. It's just that Amazon is not the perfect place for historical fiction. Amazon is wonderful for genre. 90% of what people read on Amazon, if you look at it, it's going to be mystery, suspense in fiction, or like young adult, or romance. Historical fiction is more the kind of stuff that people read in hardcover books, and get at Barnes and Nobles and places like that, which this is sold at Barnes and Nobles.
Right.
So it's going to be slower, but it keeps selling, and it keeps getting reviews. So that's good. But a sequel would probably be a help, because the minute you have a sequel, Amazon helps you when you have sequels. They really do, because they know if somebody buys one, they'll buy them all. Since I released my last suspense book called Bangkok Changes, they've been promoting it. I can't tell you, every couple of days people call me up and say, I saw your book advertised, so I guess they figured out people buy. So if I buy if they like the first in a series, these books are not as expensive as hardcovers by any means. So I think if I really wanted to like gin up sales and attention, I would write a sequel. But like, it's not like you sit down and 2 days later you got a sequel. I mean, it doesn't work that way. It's a lot of work. I'd really have to dedicate myself.
Do you know where that the other series that you did write, where the sales are generated from? Is it from Asia or is it from America?
No. It depends. I imagine a large group of people who read it are American men who have an interest in Thailand. Now, my book doesn't really delve into the sex life that only to the extent that, as you know, when you're in law enforcement and you're dealing with that kind of stuff, it's inevitable you're going to run into hookers and pimps. I mean, that, when you're trying to get informants and things like that, who do you go to? So, but other than that, this isn't one of the sex pat novels where people hang out in bars. So they probably don't like it that much. The rest seem to be American. All the books have like 4.2, all overall, and they're a little bit different. The first two are in first person, the next two are in third person, but I check them all the time because I want to see where they're going. And it's doing better than ever now, really. I mean, every single day I sell numerous copies of the book. It's not numerous, meaning a handful of one, maybe 4 of one, 2 of the other, 1 of the other. But people read a lot of them on Kindle Unlimited. So that's why to tell you the truth, I'm motivated to do a fifth one. We call it the NJA Club series. And I think recently I visited Ireland because my wife, who's a Filipino American, her niece married an Irish gentleman, wonderful guy. And we went over there to hang out in Galway for a while, and see them. And it was really great. I loved it. And while I was in Dublin, I got interviewed by a YouTube station, and I turned out that Irish people are fanatic about police procedurals and stuff. And he was really interested in how these, guys managed to solve crimes and what was it like to be a criminal lawyer and stuff like that. So right now I'm sort of thinking about what my next project will be, and that's one of them, because you hit. I mean, to be honest with you, in Amazon, if you have a successful series and you write more, it probably keeps getting better until at some point, you've just bored everybody who, you've sold it to everybody who might be interested in it. But I've seen some people do really well by having like a dozen books.
Well,
Stephen, you said there was a break. There was a break in between, obviously, when you wrote this particular book. How much time, start to finish, without the break, do you typically take to put something like this together? And what are the variables to that process?
I try, if I could do it, I try to write. I mean, I'm not saying I do it all the time. I try when we're actually working on a book. I try to do 750 to 1,000 words a day, at least 5 days a week. Sometimes you can do 1,200, and it just depends on what you're doing. And if I really try very hard to do that, and if you do that, then you could probably actually have a serviceable draft done in about 6 months, and then you yourself would have to go over it.
Sure.
How much time it takes to edit it is difficult. I have some books I've used professional editors, others I haven't. I have seen no correlation between using a professional editor and book sales or KU readership. Right. It doesn't seem to matter on Amazon readers. They don't seem to distinguish it. They want an interesting story. They're not hung up in a lot of the things that the New York Review of Books might care about. And so then but that process, after let's say 6 months to write it, a month or so, to really perfect it in your mind, then I have people who have been reading my books, friends of mine who have just been happy to read it just to get an acknowledgement or just for fun. We're all a bunch of retired guys. What do they got to do, And I've used some paid beta readers, but I find all too often it's like clickbait. They say, we'll read your book and give an opinion for X dollars, but they really just want to sell you services which you don't need.
Right.
And so, and that it could take rough, and then when you're done with it, you still have other stuff you got to do. You got to get it formatted, get a cover made up, and have some release strategy. I'd say it takes about a year per book. That would be a rough estimate. Now, some take less, but roughly about a year. This one took longer. I used editors, very good editors, and I learned a lot from them. But it takes an incredible amount of time because good ones are really busy. And it's not like they can, turn around in a month or something like that. So that's the story. But I hope that answers your question.
Oh, it does. I just wanted to give the audience a little bit, everyone's different. Every writer is.
Everyone is different. They're all, should you have an outline or not have an outline? Should you rewrite as you go along or wait till the very end? Everyone's got theories, and whatever works for you. It's like guitar playing, what's the style? Whatever works, whatever makes you enjoy playing guitar. That's all.
Yeah, that lays it out for me. Thank you.
Okay.
I know a lot of people, friends of mine, who read a lot of books on Kindle, and they prefer that. But what about people like me that like to have the book in their hands when they're reading? Where would you recommend they go to get Queensborough Rock?
Well, the easiest thing to do would be to get it from Amazon, because when you go onto Amazon page, it gives you the choice.
It's about 300 pages, give or take.
314, yeah. Now, Barnes and Noble and a couple of other places sell it, but what they really do is they just order it. They just order from Amazon, and they, it doesn't cost you any more money. But there's no, I mean, unless I have friends who have something against Amazon, and they will only buy my books, paperback books, through Barnes and Noble. It's a little more cumbersome, but they'll do that rather than because they hate Amazon. I mean, how could I hate Amazon? If it wasn't for Amazon, I wouldn't be here, right? No one would know who I was.
Right.
Well,
I'll say what I've saw in past podcasts that I've interviewed people that wrote books. If you like this book or you want to read this book, the best thing to do is go to your local bookseller and ask for the book, because they'll definitely. It doesn't have to be a big chain like Barnes and Noble. It could be an independent bookseller right in your town, and say, I'd like this book, and they'll order it for you. If you say you want it, they'll order it for you.
Because, I do have, we've gotten like ISBNs. Those are the numbers. They're not like copyrights. I think they're actually better. That registers your book, as the official person, and it's used by the industry. It's, in other words, they have access, so that your local independent bookseller who competes with Barnes and Noble and probably has books they don't have could just go into his database and type it in, it would pop up. And, he would I doubt by the time they split it with Amazon, they probably don't make a lot of money. But I have found that most independent bookstores are more interested in cultivating, customers long run. They're not looking at making a fast kill on one book.
And if somebody comes into their store and asks for specifically for Queensborough Rock, they'll probably order more than one copy.
And it's the service they provide that, if you walk into Barnes and Noble or some big chain, they may not want to waste their time on you, but a small place will figure, if I get him this obscure book he wants or she wants, they will come into me for every single book for the rest of their life.
Right.
They should, right?
They got to try harder, and that's good to the customer. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I certainly appreciate you coming on tonight. I really do hope you come out. I'd like to check back with Jack Bernstein, see how he's doing in the second half of the 70s. But if you don't,
I would too.
If you don't, I'll just wait for this one to come out in the theaters,
Well, but, I will be. I hope you don't have to wait too long.
But it sounds like your next project's going to be an addition to the series, the Asian series you're writing, eh?
I think because that, will come the quickest. But I'm working, and now it may be that the book that I'm thinking about doing about my legal experiences back in the 70s over at 120 Skirmahorn Street. And then when I got promoted to serious felonies, spent some more time over 345 Adams Street. And as you know, like every legal aid lawyer, George, once they got experience, they went out and started charging more money, right? That's how.
Sure, of course.
Yeah, that's sometimes you wonder, was I practicing on people? But then I look back, I say, you know what, after 2 or 3 years there, and George knows I'm telling the truth, a legal aid lawyer who was there every day and knew every judge and every DA and every cop could do far more for you than the most expensive, custom suited lawyer from Manhattan. They look at them, who are you,
Yeah, absolutely. You guys know the system, and you know the connections, and you have the experience to know the judges, and you know what they like and what they don't like. Whether we want to admit it or not, judges are people. So if you
totally.
And I was a transit cop, and I worked for many years. I worked around the corner from there in J Street, 370J. So I'm very, that downtown Brooklyn area I'm very familiar with, and Montague Street and Park right there, and Borough Hall Station. So yeah, I'm familiar with that.
I thought it was, I still think it's one of the most fascinating areas. I mean, being a young criminal lawyer in Brooklyn, there aren't many more things more exciting than that. And I'm thinking maybe I can work it all in. Maybe, I can have a book that deals with the era, and perhaps, living in New York City, crime was really high. Perhaps Bernstein, Jack, knows a lawyer, and, but I'd like to work it in because there are some great stories. Now that all the judges are dead, we can tell all the stories about them, So anyways.
Well, whatever it is, we'd be looking forward to it. But for now, I can strongly recommend people go out and buy Queensborough Rock. I think you'll enjoy this read, especially if you're into music, if you know the New York City era, the 70s, New York City in the 70s. This will be right up your alley. I think you'll enjoy it. So, but we definitely appreciate you coming on tonight, Stephen. What was the name of the series? The
series is called the NJA Club series, but they all begin with the word Bangkok. Bangkok Shadows was the first one. Bangkok Whispers, Bangkok Blues, and Bangkok Changes. They're all somewhat different. He fights different villains in every case. Russian gangsters, North Korean hitman, communist Chinese agents, and just, ordinary run-of-the-mill. And then the mafia in the last one, because I love writing about the mafia, as you can see.
Yeah, well, it has.
There's no mafia.
Mafia doesn't exist. Yeah.
Doesn't exist.
Well, that was J. Edgar Hoover's position, but I know other people who take a different viewpoint on it. Okay. Well, anyways, it was great. Thank you guys for.
Thank you.
It was wonderful.
We'll put a link to that. We'll put a link both to Queensborough Rock and also the NJA Club series in the show notes right below. Okay. If you're watching us on YouTube or if you're listening to us, the link will be right below in the show notes. Thank you again, Stephen and George. Thanks for co-hosting tonight.
Thank you, Thomas.
And we'll see you further on up the road, men.
Bye-bye.
Bye.